All right, looks like the participants list is stabilizing. So let's go ahead and get started. So thanks for joining us this afternoon in California and whatever time it is from wherever you're joining us from. This is another professional development panel this weekend focusing on industry careers. And we have three really amazing panelists for you today. We're gonna get started just by having each of them talk a little bit about their career paths and what brought them to this point. And then we will get to all of your questions, which I'm sure you will have for them. So here we have Kyle Frankovich, Kyle, or sorry, Kyle Frankovich, Kachi Odoemene, and Becky Clarkson. So Kyle, do you want to start us off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and your job.
Sure. Firstly, thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk to people about industry and various career paths. So, bit of background on myself. So, did my undergrad at University of Pittsburgh, where I studied psychology. Towards the end of undergrad, I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to kind of do with my life. And towards the end of my senior year, I was doing some research and realized like, oh, hey, grad school might be a thing that I'd like to do. For most people who aren't familiar with psychology programs, the vast majority of them don't allow you to go straight from undergrad to grad school. So you need to do at least a year or two of like lab work. So following undergrad, I applied to a lab position here in Chicago, where I'm currently based at UIC, where I did some schizophrenia and bipolar disorder research. And I was collecting data, doing that type of stuff for about 2.5, 3 years. That is the experience that then allowed me to get into grad school. Applied all over the place, ended up getting into UC Davis, where I studied cognitive neuroscience. That's where I did my PhD. And so I was studying like a lot of like human electrophysiology, doing behavioral experiments, that kind of stuff. Kind of classic story for, I'm assuming what this panel is going to reflect is, like grad school is like really great. I really, really enjoyed being a researcher. I really liked collecting data, analyzing data, all that type of stuff. But about 2 to 3 years into grad school, I realized like, kind of like the publish or perish aspect of academia just wasn't for me. I didn't want to like write grants and papers for the rest of my life. I wanted to do things. And so I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do. And about 3 years in my academic career, I was talking to a lab mate of mine who could kind of tell that I was just kind of like going through the motions, like I was just collecting data, doing my thing, but like my heart really wasn't in it. And he kind of noticed this and he said like, oh, there's this conference hosted by UC Berkeley students called Beyond Academia. Very similar to this, where it was like a 2 or 3 day event. They would invite a bunch of people who were former academics who had made the transition into some form of industry. So I signed up, went to that with a bunch of my friends from UC Davis. I sat in a bunch of panels, and this was kind of like my introduction to data science. I sat in on a panel from the founder of Insight Data Science, which is a fellowship that helps people transition from academia to industry. And I got to meet a bunch of people who are data scientists working in industry at a bunch of cool companies. And that was kind of like my impetus into like, oh, data science is the thing that I want to do. So last couple of years of grad school, I started working on the data science skills that I would need to transition into industry. So while I was at UC Davis, I founded a data science group for a bunch of PhDs and postdocs to get together every week at a bar. And I would just take classes with them and work on projects and pick up all the skills that I need to transition into data science. That led me to apply to Insight Data Science, where I got in early 2018. And I can describe the program in a little bit more detail later. But again, it's a 7-week program designed to help people transition from PhDs into data science. Did the program. It was amazing, absolutely wonderful. End of the 7 weeks, I started to interview with a bunch of companies for IC data science, individual contributor data science roles. Got a bunch of callbacks, started interviewing for those teams, but then I was hired by Insight to take over the program. So for the past 2.5 years, I've been running and operating the entirety of the remote program for Insight. So this whole remote world that we're all living in, I've been doing that for the past 2.5 years. And so I just now help people like me transition out of academia into data science. So that's my quick summary.
Amazing. Also, I think people will definitely have some questions for you about, getting into data science, since you think so much about these transitions in your career. Awesome. Kachi, you want to tell us where you're at?
Yeah, certainly. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Ashley, for organizing this. So I currently work as a machine learning researcher at the Applied Physics Laboratory, which is a owned by the Johns Hopkins University, but it's a basically private nonprofit company that essentially we're researchers for hire. So I have colleagues that are neuroscientists, physicists, chemists, and a lot of the work that we do is mainly some capacity, either doing some research for a sponsor, mostly government, as well as industry partners as well. So it's kind of a hybrid role that's sort of adjacent to academia, industry, and government, sort of encapsulates all three. We do have internal research programs or research funding, so you can write grants if you wanted to say maybe spend 20% of your time pursuing your favorite pet research idea that could, you know, sort of help some other ongoing research program. So it's quite nice, you know, sort of diverse set of skills and diverse set of people in terms of technical skills. And how I got there, so I've been out of my PhD for about 3 years now. So I did my PhD in Ann Churchland's lab at Cold Spring Harbor. So I was a neuroscientist formerly. I still do a little neuroscience every now and then, but a lot of my work day to day is mostly on the machine learning side, either on research or actually development. And so I knew towards the end, pretty much I didn't make the decision to jump out of academia until sort of the last year of my PhD. Like up until then, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do a postdoc. I actually interviewed at a few labs, you know, just sort of informally, sort of trying to, you know, weigh the option of doing that. But I realized that, you know, towards the end that I was like, I just didn't want to, you know, I sort of made the conscious decision that I wasn't going to pursue this, pursue an academic, at least postdoc, and started to basically try to figure out how to transition into industry. So I did apply for several jobs through the course of like my final year. And sort of one of the key things that I learned is that basically you sort of need experience. Yes, the PhD does give you some experience, but it's not the sort of experience that companies in industry are really looking for, unless, you know, the thing that you did in your PhD exactly aligns with that company. Like maybe you're going to help this startup like clear the fence with like this thing you developed in your PhD, but it's very rare that that happens. So you need to sort of demonstrate that you have sort of the skills to basically show that you can do stuff beyond your PhD work or in a lab setting. And so that's sort of where I learned Python. You know, during the last year, I was like, okay, I just, you know, there's this publicly available data set from the Allen Brain Institute. So I just downloaded it and I just did everything in Python and started to kind of branch out to do more and more things in Python. I had written all this MATLAB code and I was like, should I just convert everything to Python? I was like, it's not worth it because you're never gonna reuse it. So you might as well just start from scratch and just work on any new project you get. You just do it in Python instead of like rewriting all your code. So, I mean, for me, it was sort of a great decision. I've been very happy these last 3 years, like just being out. You know, I sleep better, I have more energy. Yeah, so that's sort of my story, sort of in a nutshell, and I'm happy to go into more details as the conversation sort of progresses.
Awesome. Thank you, Kachi. Yeah, I'm so impressed that you basically like taught yourself Python in the final year of grad school. It's amazing. And you were doing like Kaggle competitions, right?
Yeah, so
I
did a lot of Kaggle competitions, even even when I did get a job in industry, I spent some of my time outside of my job, like doing competitions. I placed really highly in one public one, just doing it on my own. And the organizers were like, wow, like everyone else sort of had all these teams or companies doing this, but you know, it's, if you enjoy it and if you have time, you know, I don't have as much time now because I have kids, but it's a fun thing to kind of basically build skills outside of your work. And, you know, you have to do this either for your current job or whether you're in your PhD or postdoc or something like that. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, Becky, give us the spiel.
Yeah. So I'm Becky. I'm currently a QA software engineer at Apple, working on health and fitness features. So for example, when I first joined, I worked on the fall detection feature that came out on the Apple Watch. So just a bit about my background. So let's see. So started undergrad at Brown University, where I did neuroscience. After that, I actually wasn't kind of sure what I wanted to do next. So I decided to do a brief year in AmeriCorps, just to do something different. So I was a first grade teaching assistant for a year in North Carolina. But then after that, decided indeed I wanted to apply to graduate school in neuroscience. So I ended up out here where I am now in San Francisco at UCSF, studying neuroscience. And yeah, so I think very similar to a lot of the trajectories that folks are talking about here. I enjoyed a lot of the research overall. Towards maybe 3 or 4 years in, started to feel like I enjoyed experiments, but I couldn't see myself doing them forever. I also definitely didn't see myself spending the next 10 years to attempt to establish a career. Kind of wanted to get to stuff sooner than that. And I also realized that as opposed to kind of the wet lab work that I was doing, I did a lot of 2-photon microscopy, stuff like that, which was super cool. But I really enjoyed kind of building the computational and not necessarily computational, but building the tools, building the analytical and like coding tools to like accomplish, all these different analytics, visualizations, all that kind of stuff. And so that kind of started pushing me in the direction of data science. And I was lucky at UCSF, they had a good Office of Career and Professional Development. I did a program there that kind of helped me learn more about different careers, and then actually ended up at Insight. So I did the Insight Health Data Science in San Francisco, which was very helpful to kind of help frame how I wanted to present myself to companies, help pull together the different tools that I was using. Similar to Kachi and to others, I kind of had started teaching myself Python towards the end of graduate school. Everything before that had been in MATLAB, or actually at first all in Igor, which maybe some of you know. Have the misfortune of knowing, which was actually when we transitioned to MATLAB, convinced my PI to get that license. We were like so excited that finally we weren't in Igor anymore. But anyhow, then I moved on to Python. So yeah, I had already been working on those skills. But Insight definitely did help with that transition. Sort of through that, essentially through that, I got reached out to from Apple to interview. And then I've been there for about 2 years. Still, unfortunately, have to deal with MATLAB sometimes, oddly enough. But my own work is largely in Python, and it's been a real neat experience to be part of.
Awesome, thanks, Becky. Yeah, Igor. Wow. Great. So we have a few questions from the audience here. Feel free to upvote your favorites as well. I'm going to throw out one more question for the panel, and then we'll get to your questions. So my question for you all is, especially because you went through these abrupt transitions from like neuroscience to other fields, is, like what decision point was kind of like a leap of faith? Like, was there any point where you're like, I don't actually know if this is going to be what I want to do? Or did anything feel like that in your career? Because I feel like that can be true, and people are often wondering, like, this doesn't feel 100% right, but at some point maybe you have to make that leap. So did you have those moments?
Yeah, I certainly did. I mean, I think for me, the biggest thing was like, I was basically at the point where I had already proposed to my girlfriend at the time, like towards the end of my PhD. So I was already thinking about starting a family. And then I was like thinking about like doing a postdoc for another like 4 or 5 years and the postdoc salary and all that. I was just like, this doesn't really sort of make sense. And I started reading about it, and you sort of learn, and it's not something that I was even really sort of aware of, but basically like more than 90% of people that end up doing their PhD in the sciences are not going to become PIs. So it's like, basically you're sort of swimming against, you're just sort of swimming against the tide if you're just really trying to like go full force and pursue a PhD. And at the same time, I sort of had to honestly evaluate like, okay, the stuff I'm doing, like, am I gonna being at Cold Spring Harbor is great. You meet a lot of smart people. And if like, you get some postdocs struggling to get jobs, you're like, what are my chances? And I mean, I don't want to say like it's an imposter syndrome type of thing, but it was just sort of more so realistically evaluating like what are the odds of me sort of making it into this field. And then at the same time, like, especially having not explored other things outside of industry or outside of academia, and in particular looking at jobs in industry. So that was sort of, you know, I did a lot of reading. There was sort of several helpful books that sort of made this sort of clear for me that I was sort of making the right choice, and that it wasn't like, oh, this thing like where I'm going to regret leaving academia or something like that. So
for me, I felt actually it was interesting. I think once I had made the decision completely that I was going to leave academia and that I wasn't interested in pursuing like further stuff like that, it actually felt kind of freeing in the sense that knowing that like in industry, like there's so much movement and so much change, and knowing that whatever that first job was, that while it was possible that I would stay there for a long time, that like it would then enable me hopefully to like move around as I wanted. So I think I also feel lucky that I kind of had enough buffer time too, between like making the decision but still being in grad school. And my PI was great. He actually let me take like the last few months to kind of work on converting my MATLAB project into Python, which was never going to be used by anybody, but like meant that I could kind of like take the time to kind of like settle into that decision, which was super helpful.
Awesome. And before we begin, Becky, you were a fellow. That's amazing. Who was your program director?
Oh my God. Well, let's see. I don't remember who was there was Joel Swenson and Brian Brian Moy, I believe, were the two like people that I interfaced with the most.
Yeah, I love Joel and Brian. Anyway, okay, sorry, very quickly. So I already briefly alluded to kind of like my moment, and it was like year 2 of grad school. It was just like this downward trend of me like, oh, I'm gonna finish in a couple years, and then what? And then it's like a postdoc, and then another postdoc, and then another postdoc, and then what? And I just knew that life wasn't for me. And so I was just like in this like, it was just like this moment where I was like so just like down and just like, again, just going through the motions, just doing my thing. And then it wasn't until I discovered data science and I met Insight Fellows, and I was like, and it became this thing. Going to that conference, there's this light bulb moment where like I meet this panel, I hear about this thing, and like it filled this void like in my soul of like, oh, that's the thing. That's what I want to do. And I literally walked out of that panel discussion with my friends, and I was like, here's what we're going to do. We get back to UC Davis tomorrow. I'm going to form a group. We're going to get together. We're going to do this thing. We're going to learn Python, SQL, machine learning, deep learning. We're going to do all these things and become data scientists. Like that's what we're going to do. And that's what we did. And like the weekend after that conference, I came back to Chicago to visit my girlfriend. We were doing long distance. And like she could see that I was happier. We went out to dinner with her father, and afterwards he said to her, he was like, what happened to Kyle? He seems happy. Like he could tell that this weight, like he could just see it on me, was like unburdened. And so the thing that I would want to say to like all of you is like, you have agency. There's something about grad school and being in academia that feels like, again, Kachi is saying like you're going against the street. It's like there's this whole system that is designed like you need to do this. You have to publish here. You have to apply to this postdoc. You have to work with this person. You have to do all these things to maybe make it. And it's like the moment that you decide that you have agency and you get to decide what you're excited about, what you want to learn, the things that you want to do, like it's incredibly freeing. And so like that was like the second half of my PhD, was like living in that world, like knowing what I wanted to do. And every single day, all the progress that I was making was like going towards what I wanted my future to be.
Yeah, I think getting out of that inertia is huge, and then realizing like you didn't even feel the inertia until it was gone, and then you were like, wait. Amazing. So we have some really great questions from the audience, so I think we'll get to those. So this first one is about work-life balance. So work-life balance is a big thing in academia, but it also seems kind of elusive. Do you feel your work-life balance drastically changed while or after transitioning to industry?
yeah, I would say yes, for sure. I pretty much, so for the various jobs that I've had, usually it's like 40-hour work weeks, which is typical. Sometimes you do have to work extra, usually if there's a deadline or something, but it's not the norm. It's sort of on a rare occasion. Like I've not had to work late, past 5 on most days, and I'm able to get my work done. And most of the emails that I get are usually within normal hours, and my weekends are my own. So basically it sort of allowed me to start crafting out, like figuring out stuff to do to fill up my time when I'm not working. So, since then I've been like, I do a lot of puzzles now, like jigsaw puzzles. So I have time to do that. I'm doing some woodworking. So, it sort of helps to sort of have other hobbies. And then obviously when you have a family, there's also other additional family responsibilities. But I feel though I have more time than say if I had to worry about like, running over to the lab to go feed my mice on the weekends to make sure. Ashley's nodding because we were in the same lab. So she gets it. So it's just one of those things you don't really have to worry about as much, but it really just depends on the kind of, I guess, lab sort of environment that you have. But so far for me, in my experience, it's been a net positive, just having just sort of the free time and not really feeling like I have to be in the lab or continuously working, and I can do other stuff. So yeah.
I'll say for myself, so Tara, I'm very curious. You say work-life balance is a big thing in academia, as in you think that there's great work-life balance in academia. I'm maybe not, that's what you're saying, but I that is not my experience. So I did as much as I could during grad school to protect my time to like actually like, I go to the lab, I work at the lab. Whenever I came home, most of the time I was good at like, I'm in my space and like not doing work. But the thing that I could not escape from was the mentally never getting away. I never had a vacation during my PhD where I wasn't thinking about it, where I wasn't guilty, where I wasn't worrying, where I wasn't stressed. Going into industry, entirely like different paradigm shift where I have weekends. I take my weekends off. I don't check my email. I don't do anything. Whenever I want to end work for the day, 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, I'm done. Like that's it. And there's no guilt. Again, somebody here saying, what are weekends? Yeah. Whenever I got my industry job after Insight, it was like my first weekend, I didn't know what to do with myself. I was like, what is this joy that I'm feeling? What is this relaxation that I'm feeling? Like, this is my first real weekend that I've had in 6 years.
Yeah, I feel like my switch of things has been a little bit less dramatic. So I felt in grad school that I had a pretty reasonable work-life balance. Sort of similarly, I tried pretty hard to protect my weekends, but I do definitely relate to kind of not being ever able to like fully step away from it, which I feel at least somewhat more possible here at Apple, like with my work now. And I think so. And okay, I definitely feel like I work more than 40 hours a week, but it's not like, it still feels pretty confined, right? Like it, and I like that there's still a fair amount of flexibility in terms of what times, well, and now everything is totally different, so who knows? But I guess, yeah, I think if it hadn't been for the fact that I live in San Francisco and the commute is pretty bad when I was commuting, I probably, I guess, would have felt a bigger abruptness of a change of like additional time. Although actually I say that, and I feel like a lot of the people that live closer somehow end up having these, longer days, whereas I'm like, nope, I'm taking that 3:40 shuttle. If I don't take the 3:40 shuttle, the commute will be 3 hours long. So by God, I am taking that shuttle. But yeah, I do agree though that like the ability, especially maybe not necessarily for every weekend, but for like gaps of like real time off where you're taking your like paid vacation, your like official vacation. I mean, I guess I don't know about your companies, but I actually like at Apple that it's like not like an unlimited vacation thing, because I like the fact that like, by God, no, these are my vacation days. I'm taking them now. And so that. And so like, this is my vacation. So that's definitely something that I really appreciate.
Yeah, I've heard that sort of having unlimited vacation days is actually weird, because then you're like, well, when can I take a vacation?
Right. And you're trying to like read the culture of like, well, is this too much? Is this not, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of being off on weekends, like thank the three of you for being here on a Saturday. I really, really appreciate you taking your time today. to do this. So we have another question, which I think is really great. So how do you recommend becoming involved in the more industry related field while pursuing a PhD? So in order to prepare myself for going in that direction after my graduate training. And maybe Kyle, you can start us off, because I think the group you started in grad school is really, really cool and a great example.
Yes, so I would recommend doing that. So the impetus for me forming that group was like being up beyond academia. I was able to be like, here are my 3 main skill gaps and I need to patch them. So I came into my program with absolutely no programming, but then it's like day one, it's like, well, you got to go collect some data. And to do that, you need to program the experiment, then to collect the data, then to get the data, then analyze it. Well, then you better learn R. And so it's like, had to learn MATLAB, design all my experiments, program them, collect the data, then used R for all my stats, analysis, and all these things. And then I realized like, oh, I don't know SQL or Python, and more importantly, Python. And so I was like, okay, I'm so busy. I'm in the middle of my PhD. And I was like, and I'm tasking myself with learning new skills and languages. And I was like, I'm going to fail. I was like, oh, I can sign up for a free online course, but knowing myself, I'm lazy and bad at everything. So it's like, I'm going to do that for 2 weeks and then just stop and just get too busy and stressed. And so it's like, I'm going to social engineer some social pressure, which is going to be this group that I'm going to form. And then it's like every week you've got to get through 2 modules and keep progressing and keep learning and doing all these skills. So that social pressure is one thing that I definitely recommend. Form your group, find your people, find out what people want to develop, and just like do that. And you'll get so much more done working in a group with social pressure. And then the second thing that I would recommend is remember that thing that I mentioned last time, which is that you have agency and you get to advocate for yourself. While let's say you have like another year or 2 in your PhD or your postdoc or whatever, like it's going to be hard. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's like set those boundaries with yourself, with your PI. Take those 2 hours every weekend or every other weekend. And those 2 hours that you block, that's your time to learn Python. That's your time to take this machine learning course. That's your time to do this networking or whatever it is. And just like, you can find the time. Like the whole, like, 80-hour work week, always at the lab or whatever, you don't need to do that. And so like, even if like you can't get down to your 40 hours a week, it doesn't need to be 80, make it 60, make it 65. And the rest of the time that you're getting back, that's yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I concur with everything Kyle said. I also think that whenever it's possible, if it's possible to like incorporate some of the new skills that you're going to be learning into your sort of PhD work, I think that's a great idea. Not always possible, right? And depends on kind of what tools the lab is using and how much kind of timing flexibility you have, because obviously if you're kind of switching things over, it can take some lead time. But I definitely advise that. It also depends. I mean, I think the online stuff too, depending on kind of what intrinsically motivates you, the online courses can be super helpful. Another thing I'll say is just like, if you're thinking about potentially going into data science, like set up a GitHub and just do it now. Like, because basically like being able to show that like, even if like it's just some basic scripts that you're working on, obviously assuming that you can put them on the public GitHub, like to be able to then show that you understand even the bare basics of like, oh, I can make a commit and I can push that commit and all of those things, and showing that you've had some, at least number of months, period of time that you've actually done that, I think is actually super compelling to folks who are gonna like be looking at your application. Because also, especially like if you are going through a PhD and have a PhD, I do think that there's, at least where I was looking, there's a recognition that like that does give you a lot of really important skills in terms of your ability to like structure your time and do sort of higher level analysis and kind of, so right, you already have a lot to offer, but then being able to show like this concrete evidence that like, okay, like I haven't just done like a bunch of little scripts at work, I've at least tried to kind of consolidate stuff, or I've tried to like do version control and like do these kind of things, I think can be like really, really good. And like really isn't that hard if you just like start as soon as you can to just start putting some stuff up there.
Totally. Kachi, do you have anything to add, I guess, besides like teaching yourself Python and doing Kaggle competitions?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the main thing, everyone has pretty much said the same thing. And I totally agree with everything that's been said. Like in terms of learning actually to maybe learn Python, for example, you have to start, I think for me, for example, I don't like sitting through classes and just kind of just being fed information. Just start with a project. So like start on the very high level and then figure out like, okay, what do I then need to then complete this project? And you can then, you know, learn all the different packages or different ways of doing things and maybe the theoretical foundations that may underlie it. Because I feel like that's more, at least for me, is more important. Like it's sort of the analogy that I like to use. Like when you learn to play any sport, you're not going to go sit down and learn physics before you learn to like play baseball. Like you just go and start playing baseball or some sport or whatever. So I sort of like that more practical sort of approach to just learning new skills. And, you know, you may not get a job based off of your first project, but if you make it a habit, you know, as Becky pointed out, start with a GitHub. GitHub has really nice additional sort of tools that they offer, like you can make a web page, you know, github.io, you know, so you can basically make your, you know, small website where you can host your blog. And then you basically, for every project, you just write up, you can actually just convert your entire notebook into a blog post, you know, automatically. So then, you know, you just do that and, you know, 4 or 5 projects down the way, you've learned so much. And, you know, when you actually do get to the point where you interview, you have a lot of things to talk about besides your PhD project, which they might not know about, but they know stuff in Python or related to the project that you might be able to talk to them about. And it could be really simple. Like it could be something related to your actual project that you think is kind of cool that you wanted to try, but, you know, it's not really going to fit neatly into your thesis. But, you know, try to think more broadly and look up examples. Like GitHub is great because you can actually see how people write code and try different things out. Like a really good one recommendation I'll throw out there is the fast.ai course. Like if you're into deep learning, machine learning, it's a really good hands-on practical course that sort of teaches you how to do things in, you know, how to basically complete machine learning projects. So I would, you know, that would be one place to look at if you know, want to sort of jump into this kind of data science-y space.
Awesome. So after folks have done all these things that are amazing during their grad career, let's talk a little bit about getting a job, maybe at your respective places. Yeah, so we have a couple questions along those lines. So first one is, how important is a core computer science, AI, or machine learning skill set for a job in these industry positions? So, you know, many of the people here might have domain neuroscience knowledge, right? And not necessarily computer science knowledge. Yeah, so what should they be learning? What packages do they need to know? What do you need to get a job in these industries?
Yeah, so I would say that like in terms of the core computer science, like, so I have sort of mixed reviews about like how to like answer this particular question, because it really depends what role you're trying to apply for. So you might get like a machine learning role where they really are looking for a software engineer that just happens to also know machine learning. In some cases, they really want a machine learning engineer that does know how to write code. So you kind of have to read between the lines of the job description. I've interviewed for several, like, or even turned down some like interviews because just by reading the job description, where it's like they want a software engineer, then they want like someone that knows like DevOps and also knows machine learning, and they're like, oh, we want 3 people in one to just do this one role, and they're going to pay you X, which is not even enough. You know, type of thing. So, you know, you have to kind of read between the lines. So if you know what I would sort of, you know, pay attention to what the job descriptions are. Like some roles will have, like I know, for example, at DeepMind, they have like a set of questions that they ask you like that are focused on computer science. And it's hard to kind of learn what you need to know for, you know, to answer some computer science questions. But a lot of this you can learn on YouTube. But I would focus more on sort of actually implementing some of these, applying some of these machine learning algorithms to specific problems. And that's why I just go back to like work on problems and then try to then, you know, convince people to then hire you based on what you've done in that space. And sort of more concretely is like when you actually apply, you have to kind of reach out to people in the company, either through recruiters or through individuals that could either refer you so that your application can actually be seen, and sort of highlight some of the projects that you've done such that it matches maybe the things that they're looking for in the job description, and don't just submit an application blindly. I think that's sort of one of the main rules that you sort of don't really think about as well. So yeah. But yeah, I think the panelists probably have more to add to that, but there's not really, I don't really think that there's like a list of these are all the check boxes you have to really check. It really varies from role to role, and there isn't really like one thing. So you probably just better off learning a good set of skills through projects, for example, and then sort of building your way up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, I think, right, it very much depends on what you're going to end up applying for. And I think also, like for starters, I just really think like that just focusing on doing like you saying, like doing some projects, likely in something like Python. I think Python is definitely like the right place to start there. Like, so doing a project in Python, learning the basic libraries there, the things you think of, like, right, like NumPy, SciPy, Matplotlib, Pandas, all that kind of stuff. At least having that as like a baseline knowledge to show. And then because I think beyond that, like obviously if you're looking at like a domain expert situation, you might obviously need to like bulk up on like sort of more specific like machine learning, that kind of stuff. I do think also I did find Insight really helpful in terms of like interview prep, and there are also like resources online to like for like interview type questions, both in terms of like coding questions and in terms of like what types of interview questions there are. I mean, the thing is there's like a huge gamut of like what companies decide to ask, and some of them are the ones that these like bizarro questions that are like, I don't know, that I don't even know, right? Like they're all over the map, but like having some experience in like thinking about answering different types of questions that might come from these different companies is like super helpful. Even though you may not, prepare for the exact thing, it like getting some training in either through like mock interviews and stuff like that. That was something that Insight did, which was super helpful. So like if you have friends who work in industry or like anything like that, trying to have them do some like coding interviews with you, or asking you questions, I think could be pretty good preparation as well. But yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned it, the coding interview. So that's for some of these jobs, they can either be like a take-home coding or data science challenge of some sort, or they can be a live coding session. So you have to figure out what you're more comfortable doing. So yeah.
Very, very quickly before we move on. So like the importance, since I work with a lot of people making this transition, and I can read into this question, a lot of it is like anxiety about having a lack of that formal computer science background, because mostly what happens is we're all scientists, we get into a program and you need to learn to code and to program like as a means to an end. And so what ends up happening is that you end up writing very scripty, bullshit, stupid MATLAB scripts that are like 1,200 lines long to be able to do something stupid. And I say this as somebody who used to write bullshit, hacky 1,200 line. Yeah, like whatever, we're all familiar with that. For industry, typically, if you're doing anything that's going to involve programming, that's not enough. You need to level up. And the way you need to level it up is to be able to like jump through those hoops of the interviews that Kachi was just talking about, of like, you're going to need to like live code this or do some paired programming or whatever. And so in order to do that, you need to learn some computer science fundamentals. So there's a couple things here. One, that's very studyable and it's relatively easy to acquire. It's scary, especially when we start out, but you can grind it out. You can study and you can prep and you can practice and you can just pick up those skills. And then that's going to allow you to jump through stupid hoops of being able to like pass a coding interview, but then also it's going to level up your actual technical capabilities of being able to like more productionalize the projects that you're doing. So I'd recommend just like, if you're going to go into some of these types of roles, carve out some time to just learn those CS fundamentals.
Awesome. So speaking of interviews, there's a question here sort of about, how the hiring process works. So if you have any insight into this at your, organization. So, who gets an interview? If something goes wrong, what are the mistakes that, a lot of academics tend to make in these interview processes?
I can take a stab at this, I guess. So in terms of like, I think one of the ways that I found just to be true most of the time, and especially in all the places that I've applied to so far, is like you need to know someone in the company or need to have reached out to someone in the company internally to help at least maybe facilitate your application. Like my current job now, I think I applied like maybe, I looked it up, but it's like I applied like in the course of like 5 years or so, I've applied there, not 5 years, but in like, I think I applied right after my PhD, like 3 or 4 positions there. And then so I've been there 2 years now. And for that role, I applied for 2 positions. So I applied for 2 different roles. But the difference between like the 2 years between, like when I first finished my PhD and when I actually got a job, the biggest difference was that I sort of reached out to recruiters internally and said, hey, this is my research, or here's my resume. This is what I've done. Do you know who the hiring manager for this role is? And can you sort of reach out to them? And LinkedIn is your friend. I think most people in academia, I think I saw this on Twitter, like they were kind of bashing LinkedIn because like we don't use this, but if you're not in academia, you should be on LinkedIn, or if you're trying to get out, LinkedIn is definitely your friend. It's a way to basically make connections and find people within companies that can introduce you to places. So that's sort of the biggest thing to sort of clear the first hurdle, because a lot of these companies, when you apply online, like they have like 2 separate, submissions. One is like an internal referral system, and the other one is like just general audience or whatever. And most of the times they rarely pick resumes from that general audience. They tend to prefer ones from internal. So it's usually a good idea to try to make that connection. As far as the interview process, your recruiters and the recruiters within the firm should usually help guide you in terms of like what to prepare for. And you can always ask questions about how to actually prepare. This is something I didn't realize when I first started, is that you can always ask the recruiters, like, what kinds of questions do they ask? Like what, to get a sense of that, especially if the recruiter doesn't tell you outright. Like most times they will tell you what to prepare for. Some jobs you might have to give a talk depending on the kind of role it is. Some you might have to do a coding interview. I prefer the data science challenges that I had to take home as opposed to doing it live, but that's just my preference. Like some people like to code in front of people, but that's just you sort of can pick the interview style that sort of works for you. But it's sort of good practice. The more you interview, the better you get at it, type of thing. So, getting the first job might be hard, but then each one gets easier. And then like you get to a point where basically you're always turning down requests on LinkedIn for jobs. So that's sort of, something to look forward to, even just after 2 years or so after getting out of academia.
Yeah, Kyle, Becky, thoughts on
yeah,
hiring?
I was just, I mean, so I haven't done too much on like the actual like hiring side. Usually, like I've done interviews that basically my manager will be like, hey, Becky, can you do this interview? But I mean, I can at least provide so what, I can give you a sense of at least what my interview process looked like when I applied to Apple. So basically it started out with an interview with, I believe with a recruiter, to kind of get a sense, I think with her, whether she felt I was a potential match to interview. And then I did a coding phone screen. So that was sort of I forget whether it used CoderPad or something like that, where I don't even think we used video, but just where they can see you code. And I like CoderPad a lot. And I think it's, at least on our team, it's pretty common. What's nice, as opposed to kind of the more thought experiment algorithm questions, is that you can actually run your code. And I also, as an interviewer, like that it can give you a sense into someone's kind of troubleshooting style. Like I really like when people actually like test it out in the console and like, put in at least like print statements or put in debugging statements to figure out like if it's not working, that kind of thing. So anyway, I had a coding interview, then had a coding challenge. So that was like just like a take home like weekend thing, which was actually pretty fun to do. And I think it is an opportunity to kind of show off kind of your ability to write good, clean code. And so obviously advise taking your time with those, depending on obviously the constraints of what you're supposed to do. But impress them with your, documentation and like actually putting in, clear code. Then there was the on-site interview. This is really, it's a pretty extended process. So this is, I think it all took about like 5 or 6 weeks, maybe 5 weeks for like getting the offer. And then and then another few weeks for like the background check. So, right. Then I had the on-site, which was like a full day at Apple Park, where like I talked with like, I gave a short talk at the beginning about my work, and then talked to like different people throughout the day and had a mix of like thought experiment questions and like some whiteboarding type stuff. I didn't actually have any of the like binary tree random data structure stuff, which was really nice. I appreciated that. Yeah, and that was, and then I had another follow-up phone call with like a higher up person at Apple. So yeah, it was a series of like different kind of phone calls and on-sites. Yeah. I don't know how helpful that is, but just to share like an example of like that experience. It was also a little funny. The background check actually took it felt like a really long time. It took like 2 or 3 weeks to get resolved, and it turned out the issue. So I filled out my whole thing, right, with like all of my like jobs and career stuff. The issue was that I stated my neuroscience time as work, and they couldn't find W-2s for that entire time. And then couldn't figure out like this whole, it took like a week of like back and forth with a recruiter who had no idea like what these different types of things are. And I'm trying to explain, no, I had a grant for this. Anyway, it was a saga. It was fine. Like I knew they weren't going to reject me just because it took a while to like get through this process. But it was just kind of funny because it was like, oh my God. I'm trying so hard to like write everything as honestly as possible. And they're like, oh, but we only found proof that you worked at UCSF from, for these 2 years.
Oh my gosh. It's good to know that sometimes things are a little slow in industry, like considering how long the academic, job process takes, like there's sometimes holdups in industry. Okay. Great. Kyle, do you have anything to sort of add to thinking about hiring or thinking about how folks should interview for these types of jobs?
No, I was glad to hear their feedback. Again, I mostly help people interview at a bunch of other companies. So I have endless companies I talk about, but that don't have enough time.
Fair enough. Someone has a specific question about sort of folks with molecular biology or biophysics backgrounds, and they're wondering if you've seen people with those backgrounds. Do you work alongside those people? Have you seen them come through Insight or, yeah.
I mean, definitely saw them at Insight. I'm not sure of all the academic backgrounds of all the people on the broader team, but it's a lot, like not exclusively, but a lot of different PhDs from different kind of generally quantitative backgrounds. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's a whole range.
Awesome. Yeah, and I want to bring back the question about mistakes people make, especially academics. And one thing I've heard from companies is that, academics will often come in and say, well, I'm trying to get away from academia. Basically they come in with this like, academia is terrible and I don't want to do that. So will you hire me? And that's, as you can imagine, probably not a really good approach. So I would say definitely, have a reason you want to work at that company besides just escaping academia. And I don't know if there's any other mistakes. Yeah.
Depends on who you're talking to as well. Because they might share the same.
I was going to say I'd probably relate, but yeah, probably not good to lead with that.
Yeah.
Like you definitely want to emphasize the things you're excited about, or like the things in academia that then excite you to move into, like that, like you want to do more of that thing you started with, and therefore this is why this makes sense. Not necessarily like it was terrible, but maybe we'll get to that later over lunch when we, but you definitely don't want to rant during a job interview anyway, but.
Yeah.
Also,
okay. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, like, we all here can probably understand that you're maybe not going to be interviewing with somebody who's a former academic. And so you being negative to somebody of like, oh, academics a garbage fire, like there's no jobs, so I'm just going to slum into industry and you're lucky to have me. Like that is a really shitty attitude for somebody. And it's like maybe if also a former academic can like maybe understand. Of course, you wouldn't be as stupid as I was there in my cartoon example, but it's like another academic, again, over lunch, like you could probably like maybe like talk about your frustrations a little bit. You're going to be talking to maybe somebody who isn't coming from academia. And so you leading with negativity is not going to do you any favors.
I would also add, like basically in terms of mistake, maybe also being maybe too rigid on what you want to work on. Like, let's say you want to continue doing what you did in your PhD at the company and they may or may not be doing it, or they might do something adjacent. You want to sort of be flexible in terms of like what you want to work on and be excited about working on other things. Because I think sometimes some academics might just get caught up and like, I need to continue pursuing this pet thing. And the company might be like, well, we may or may not have the resources to pursue that, you know, or XYZ. So having some kind of flexibility in sort of what you want to work on, I think helps as well.
And I was just reminded, I've got a big mistake that a lot of people make. So in Insight, like Becky probably learned this, that like before you get an onsite, before you get called into a pipeline at a company, we teach you to do something called a deep dive into the company. And this is something that I was on the data science job market before I got into Insight, and I got some interviews, and it's just like, well, I'm smart, I know how to program, and I'm a bit of machine learning, so I'm going to go and interview for this data science position. And the thing that I wouldn't do is like, do you know the structure of the data science team? Do you know how the data science team is integrated within the organization? How does the organization make money? What do they care about? And then once you take some time to think about these things, you can anticipate what kind of skills do I think they're going to value? What sort of questions do I anticipate they're going to ask me? If they're going to ask me a business case study in which I need to think about, like imagine you're on the team and you need to do blank. If you've thought about that beforehand, it can give you a lot of like preparation. And also it allows you to like practice your behavioral questions of like, okay, you're coming from molecular bio. What skills do you think that would transfer to this? If you haven't taken some time to really think about how you can sell yourself in a very cool little like elevator pitch, like you're doing a disservice to yourself. So that's a big mistake a lot of people make, of just like, I'm smart and capable and that's just going to shine. And it's like, yes, you are smart and capable, but you haven't necessarily done the prep work. Like, why is your cleverness going to translate to business value here at this organization?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, so for example, when we have people applying, I work on a QA position. And so it involves a lot of different things, right? But we're trying to, you know, validate the performance of different algorithms and things like that. And one thing that happens is that folks will come and be coming from more of like a machine learning side and be talking about how excited they are about machine learning and like how that's, you know, and it's like, okay, like machine learning background would be totally fine for our role. Like that's fine, except we want to make sure that they're not just going to be like, wait, why am I not getting a chance to work on the algorithm? It's like, no, we're not working directly on the algorithm. We're, you know, validating and, you know, doing performance and doing data visualizations related to it. And so kind of had they kind of spent at least a little more time reading the, you know, reading the, oh my God, why am I blanking? You know, the job posting. Now, granted, with Apple, it's always a pretty opaque. So there is that. But, you know, at least knowing somewhat more about like what they're looking for so that you at least don't overemphasize your interest in something that doesn't line up. Like, I mean, don't lie about your interest, but like, it's not helpful to go into an interview like that, talking a ton about, say, machine learning when that's not the role.
Yeah, even just doing a little bit more research, I think can make a big difference sometimes. Yeah. So we are just a few minutes left. So there's two questions that I want to try to hit here. And the first one is, what does your day look like? And I'm thinking to kind of go through this quickly, maybe just what is the breakdown between like technical and meetings and maybe like, you know, writing and communication, like between those three things. Hopefully that's kind of most of your job. What is the rough breakdown?
So what was it? The various technical.
Yeah, between like technical things, taking meetings, maybe like writing emails, like what is the sort of general breakdown between these things in your day or your week? Kachi might be frozen. Oh, there he is.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, it says, yeah, I think my internet's slowing down. So I think 75% of the stuff I do is technical, and then the rest is like meetings and communications and writing up. So very technical, involved like reading papers or writing code. things like that. So, so it's very flexible. I mean, I work from home most of the time, even before this pandemic hit. So, yeah.
I'd say fairly similar. I mean, it definitely ebbs and flows with the meetings. I'm an individual contributor, so which is what I want, at least for now. And so yeah, a lot of the time, it's at least 60% of the time, maybe 70% of the time is spent doing kind of individual work. But yeah, definitely also meetings. When I was working at Apple Park, it was also, of course, like commute time, but you know, there's that.
Right. And Kyle, you're probably a little less technical because you're mostly working with folks. Yeah. All right, awesome. And final question to kind of wrap us up. Some people are wondering, do you ever miss neuroscience? And if so, what do you miss about neuroscience or research?
No, not really. I mean, I do get, like, I still like keep up with, like, not really keep up, but like I have like one of these feeds, like RSS feeds, like on bioRxiv and archive. And I occasionally look at the neuroscience stuff, and it's like, I like, oh, these people like built a new, like, I don't know, recording system for like mice or something like that. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. But I was like, yeah, I'm glad I'm not doing that. Like, I'm glad these other people figured it out. So yeah, I mean, I sometimes look, but I don't feel like I would love to be doing that. And I always used to tell myself, like, I think when I was transitioning, that basically all my friends that want to do, like, go in the academia route, if they do get a lab, you know, I can just talk to them and be like, can I moonlight like one night a weekend or something like that, and just go work, do some experiments or something. But I don't see myself doing that anytime soon. So yeah.
Yeah, I get plenty of neuroscience just from the occasional conversations with good friends I have who still do neuroscience, but I definitely don't miss kind of the lab life and the lab work and stuff like that. Like, I definitely really enjoy like kind of doing the technical work, and yeah. So no, I wouldn't say that I miss it.
I've never missed it for a moment. I'm so much happier. I'm so much healthier. My life has improved exponentially ever since moving on. The only points that I would miss is like, the further and further I get from like the misery of grad school, like it's easier to like focus with like rose-colored glasses on like the good parts of like literally bringing somebody in, taking hours to set them up in an experiment that I've designed, collecting their brain data, and then like plugging it into my computer in a script that I spent months and like pushing the button, and this all comes together and I can see what their brain is doing in something that I designed. Is like very cool and interesting. But it's like, again, I'm romanticizing, like that was like the good moment that was surrounded by a lot of misery. Whereas now my life is like way more balanced, and no, I don't miss it at all.
Reassuring that you can leave academia and you can not only get a job outside of academia, but actually be happy and maybe even happier. I think that's really good for folks to hear. Yeah. Any closing thoughts from you all before we break? Anything you feel like you didn't get a chance to say, or closing thoughts?
Just want to reiterate, definitely, if you're like interested in going into it, just get like your like GitHub and stuff set up. Like, I feel like that kind of thing is like super small, but like is actually like a big step towards being more able to like get job offers and get like, it's a good step in that direction.
Yeah, that's a very good action item. One other action item: set up your LinkedIn profile as well, and start trying to reach out to people as well. So yeah.
Seconding that. So here's your homework. Anybody who wants to go into industry, start your GitHub, start working on independent, non-academic data science projects, take your online courses. And if you're doing that, what you need to do is, this is a little bit about what Kachi had mentioned earlier. It's like, learn the lesson for this, but then go and find an outside data set and apply it. You don't know something until you apply it, and just like going through the coursework isn't enough. Okay, so that's all that type of stuff. Sorry, my dog is being annoying. And then LinkedIn, very important. Set up your LinkedIn, take it seriously, start connecting with people. And then the way that you're going to build out your network, I'd recommend you all start setting up virtual coffee dates with people. Reach out to people, and not just like, hey, get me a job at your company, but it's like, what is your role? Like, it's not just about like tricking people into getting you in, but start talking to industry people and start learning from them.
Yeah, no, the informational interview can be super helpful. Like, and it's like really like if you start now when you're not looking for a job, that's really ideal because then you can just have much more. That's when you can talk about like all of your interests and like what you're most driven towards because they can help you figure out if the things that they're doing would match up with that. So I did a lot of that informational interviews, really helpful.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Kyle, because that was super important. Like I spent a lot of my time just asking people like what they do at their job just to figure out, and it was able to like help you figure out what to even apply for. Because you're like, oh, this sounds like really cool, but then you realize like you don't actually get to do what the job description says it's supposed to do. So yeah, it's definitely good to just reach out to people and just find out what roles are out there and what people are doing. So yeah.
In your opinions, do you think cold emailing folks is okay? Do you think that's kind of acceptable? Yeah. Have you all cold emailed just like random people in other industries? Yeah.
I do it all the time. I mean, like, I don't know, like there's such a low barrier to doing it. Like it's the worst case scenario, they're not going to respond. And, there's always other people that will be happy to kind of just tell you their whole life story. But yeah.
Yeah, I've definitely. Oh, sorry, no.
No, I'm done.
I was just gonna say, no, I've definitely done it and myself. And I mean, I think, yeah, it's definitely not bad to do it. I think probably like for myself, I probably wouldn't answer unless there's like some connect, like if it was totally like no connection, but like I've had people from like UCSF or like who went through Insight or things like that. And definitely had some like really good conversations out of that. But also, right, even if someone doesn't answer, like it doesn't hurt to have sent like a short, polite email or LinkedIn message.
Yeah. I think that you should do it. Ashley, I'm so sorry that we're going over time. Cold emailing, talking to people, building that thing. Something that I realized early in my career transition was that networking is something that is like very much almost looked down upon within academia, whereas in industry it's a thing. And something that I noticed that was like very cool and interesting, that was unexpected, is that especially in people who have left academia, who've gone into industry, I found so much warmth in people that I'd reach out to. I'd be like, oh, I'd fret over an email for 30 minutes and I'd like overstress and I'd send it out and they're like, yeah, sure, let's find some time, let's meet up, let's do this, I want to help. And like there's people, I don't know what it is, and maybe this is just confirmation bias, but like I found a lot of people willing to help out and like who were able to like reach down and like help like lift me kind of out of it. Just do it. Start networking. It feels very uncomfortable. Practice it, do it. Like set yourself, I mentioned the carving out those 2 to 4 hours or whatever per week to do this. An hour of that should be outreach, should be looking up people, sending those emails, and like keep yourself accountable and keep building out your network.
Awesome. So everybody here has a to-do list, make a LinkedIn, make a website, GitHub, email anybody and anyone that sounds interesting to you with a thoughtful email about where you're coming from and why you're interested in what they do. I think that's a really, really great place to start. So we can go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Becky, Kyle, Kachi, for your time on this Saturday. I'll leave the Zoom open maybe for 5 more minutes or so, since there's still a lot of questions in the chat that I'm sure our panelists, if they have a chance, could maybe answer. And in particular, there's some questions about folks in Europe and other countries, and I'll try to answer those as well as in the chat here and on the questions. So thanks again for tuning in. Thanks to our panelists. And yeah, feel free to hang out a little longer if you want to just chat and say hello.